as I move this around, you can see that it is highlighting different exposure ranges. This value is in stops above or below middle grey. Let's go to -2.5. That pretty much covers the full range of exposures on her face. And when we turn it off, we see we have quite a high contrast ratio between the key side and the dark side of the face there. If you wanted good shadows on the face, you can see that that is not happening because both sides here have exactly the same exposure readings on the DCTL. And what's worse is you see in the background, a lot of the elements in the background are actually matching the same exposure. So the contrast from the background isn't so great either. Yeah, not much I can do about it, but I just thought I'd show you as an example of when this tool could be telling you on set you need to have a different backdrop, or you need to find a way to bring in some negative fills or something. If you can, you're going to want to export a LUT from this that has a contrast that you're aiming for. So I typically like an 8:1 contrast ratio. You right click and then you generate LUTs. Some time ago I created a video going over a tool that I'd made for Resolve, a DCTL, which allows you to analyze the exposure and contrast ratios of your scene. I decided that in order to integrate better, I would just use the same color scheme as Ed Lachman's EL Zone does. Anyone who watched that video will know that they got in contact with me and asked me to stop doing that because they weren't very happy that I had recreated the tool essentially that they were trying to sell for money, and I was giving away a similar tool for free. But that's okay, because I've created something new and I call it Ratio. Let's dive in. Okay, so here we are in Resolve, and the footage that I'm showing you now is from a micro short indie film that I shot a couple of weekends ago. Let's go with this for now. What I've got is I have all of the clips here are in a group, and all the clips in that group are receiving the same look. So if I go into group post clip here, this is a stripped down node setup. I've kind of simplified the way I normally do things just for the purposes of this video. The original system had too much information. I found that I was only really using a couple of different exposure levels. I was mostly just interested in the key side of the face of a subject, how exposed that was, and the shadow side of a subject as well. I was paying attention to those two ratios, those two exposure values, and then for the most part ignoring everything else. So you were getting loads and loads of information that was just distracting. I found distracting and not particularly useful. So I thought, well, why don't I build a tool specifically for this purpose, for getting lighting ratios on your face right? Hang on, I'll get cold. Okay, so I've put all the clips in a common group, and all of those groups have a grade applied to them just via this look. So if I turn that off and on, you see I've got a bit of contrast and usual stuff. And I'm working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate as my working space, which is going out as a Rec 709. And if I go to my clip, I have another CST here, which takes my Blackmagic Gen 4.5 Color Science into DaVinci Wide Gamut, my working space. If you want to use this DCTL with a color managed workflow in the DaVinci Resolve settings, you can do that, because I will get into that now. You see here I've got the ratio DCTL applied after my clip adjustments and before the look. It's switched off at the moment. I'm going to switch it on now. Okay, you can see here that I have a key at the bottom here, which will show you exposure ranges, and this is completely adjustable. We have 3 different input gamma options. We have DaVinci Intermediate, which is what I use most often. You've got Arilog C for people who use Arilog C3, and you have linear. If you want to use a different input gamma, you can. You just need to sandwich it between some color transform nodes, that's all. I'm leaving mine at DaVinci Intermediate because that's what I'm working in, and it also outputs DaVinci Intermediate. So the input and the output are now the same. I'll just go from top to bottom. The key height here controls how high the key is, and then you have target 1 position, target 2 position, and target 3 position. And target 3 at the moment is switched off. As I move this around, you can see that it is highlighting different exposure ranges. So this value is in stops above or below middle grey. So when it's set to 0, that's middle grey. If it's set to 1, that's 1 stop above middle grey. Let's find our face levels at the moment. So if I set target position 2 to about here, if I set that to -2, okay, so if we go a bit further, let's go to -2.5, that pretty much covers the full range of exposures on her face. And when we turn it off, we see we have quite a high contrast ratio between the key side and the dark side of the face there. So what this is telling me is we have a range of +1 stops and -2.5 stops. It's a 3.5 stop difference, so that is a bit more contrast than an 8:1 contrast ratio, because an 8:1 contrast ratio would be 3 stops of difference. As we move down here, we have this control here, that's target width in stops. So as we shrink that down, you can see that the range that it is capturing is slightly different. So if you have this set to 0.5 stops, what you get is everything that's yellow is everything between 0.75 stops above middle grey and 1.25 stops above middle grey. As you increase the target width, you can see here on the key, it's just including a wider range of exposure values around your target stop. When in the DCTL, I normally keep that at a 0.5. And then the next one is surround width in stops. So that just gives you a kind of a lead in to your main value. Just I decided it was useful to have a kind of a broader range of colours as well as the narrower band, just to visually help draw you to the colour. This option, perceived luminance, the only thing that changes is it biases the exposure values depending on the RGB channels that the camera is picking up. The human eye is more sensitive to green, so when perceived luminance is switched on, it's based on the broadly accepted ratio of red, green, blue channels which the human eye perceives as brightness. And if you switch it off, what you get is a kind of objective scientific measure rather than a perceived measure of brightness. That's the only difference. I leave it on. It doesn't tend to make much difference. It will make more difference in a scene that has a lot of green versus red or whatever like that. Middle grey, all that does is it picks out middle grey and highlights it green. That's just sometimes that's useful. And then we have target 1 and target 2 and target 3. I normally leave target 3 off because I'm only really concerned about a couple of different values when I'm getting exposure. But if you're just concerned with one value, you can turn target 2 off and put target 1 wherever you want it, and then target 2 if you want to do bright shadow levels. If you want an additional level, maybe you have a very specific need where you have one exposure value for the bright side of the face, one for the dark, and maybe you're also concerned about the brightness of your background, and then you will turn on target 3, and I have target 3 as a kind of purple colour here. If I turn target 2 off, looking at it now, I feel like it should be a little brighter, so I'll probably adjust the colour there before I upload this for download. So let's turn it off for now. Down here now you'll see an option for brighter colours. Now what's that for? If I just turn it on, you'll notice that it actually makes it look worse. But the reason for that is it's intended to be not viewed in Rec 709. So if I go into the CST and I turn that off, it looks a lot more useful now. The idea behind that is when I use this in LUT form, when I export a LUT from this, I tend to prefer overlaying the colours onto a log image rather than a Rec 709 image, so that's what that option is for. And I'll get into that later when I show you how to export a LUT. So for now, let's just turn that off. And then we have step increment, and I normally leave that at 0. If I turn it to 0.5, you see now that the key isn't a smooth gradient anymore, it's segmented into half stop sizes. And that's actually true of the image as well. You can see here each stop has now been distinctly separated. And then if you set that to 1, let me just turn off the targets. You see we've divided the image into stops here, just in grayscale, and then 2 as well is getting a bit... I don't have much use for 2. In fact, I don't have much use for any of these particularly. I just I tend to leave it on 0, which is the default, and then just have the targets on top. And then input gamma I've already explained. So those are all of the settings. Now let's have a look at using them. Okay, let's go back to this shot and see here. So I'm looking at the image here, and I am seeing that this front of the face is well exposed, about a stopum of above middle grey, which is about where you'd probably want it to be when you're shooting. It doesn't necessarily have to stay there when you're colour grading, but I think it looks good like this, so let's leave it there. That's about an 8:1 contrast ratio, I'd say. Things that I'm noticing: it's good that this part of the face is exposed to this level, and then the background is clearly at a different significantly different exposure level. That's good. It means you're going to get contrast. If you're looking at a face and it's all the same colour, if you're looking at a face and the background is the same colour as the face, then you know you're not getting good contrast in that image. Another thing I would note is that you can see that this level around the table here is looking a bit hot because it's a similar exposure to the face. So if I turn it off, you'll see that, yeah, that's kind of a problem. This part of the image is drawing the eye more so than the face. So I might, at this point, go into my clip adjustments and throw in a node that handles... so if I bring this in, and just do a power window here and invert it, and then bring the exposure down in the rest of the scene. It's not working. Just bring the exposure down a little bit. I can do that either by eye, or if I turn this on, I can see that I've significantly reduced the level in that scene. And to my eye, that's looking a lot better in terms of drawing the eye to the face in the scene rather than to the table. So the way that I would use this after I've exported a LUT and I've put that LUT onto my monitor is I would be setting the level on the dark side of the face first, and then bringing up the light side of the face, and I would probably have a specific contrast target that I'm going for. So right now it's set to 8:1, which broadly speaking is what we're getting, I think. It may be a little bit more it's a little bit more contrasty than that, but the lighting is very soft. It's always difficult to draw the line. You just need to make sure that you're being consistent about how you expose a face. Okay, so this shot brings up an important issue regarding the differences between using a light meter in the real world versus using an exposure measuring method that is based off the image that you receive in camera. When I shot these clips, I was using vintage Nikon lenses, and as we know, vintage lenses are lower contrast and they're also prone to flare when presented with high contrast images. This image has a huge amount of sky in the background, and that's causing, you can actually see it, the shadows here to be lifted higher than they actually are in real life. If I turn on ratio, I have fiddled with these settings to show what the shadow size and what the light side of the face are exposed as, and it looks like they're roughly about 2 stops, so we're getting a 4:1 contrast ratio in camera. But if you were to take your light meter, assuming you have one, and measure the shadow and the light side of the face separately, you will probably get different values. So what's happening here is light from the sky is being scattered in the lens and is polluting the shadows in the image. This is both a good thing and a bad thing depending on what you want, because at the end of the day the amount of contrast you get in camera is what matters. It's what's going to be on the screen, right? So it's useful to know that. But also it's useful to know what the actual lighting is doing in your actual space. So it's important to know that in certain situations you can't really trust the values that you're getting on your monitor. If the thing that you want to know is what light levels are actually happening in the scene, because they won't necessarily be the same. So let's have a look at maybe a different shot. In this particular shot, it's a little bit underexposed compared to the others. I think that's because the lens was cranked as wide open as it could go, and this was just what it came out as. So if I turn this on here, you can see the light side of her face is actually exposed a little bit too low compared to the other images in the shot, which is fine because even as it is, I think it looks quite good. But say for instance you wanted to match them, let's give that a go. We want this side of the face to be yellow, so let's just increase the exposure until we're there. I'd say that's about it. I'm ignoring the highlight that she has here because that doesn't really count. That's more of an edge. It's not the face exposure. So yeah, and we can see the ratio is consistent. We've got, if I turn it down here, it's about -2 from the dark side to the light side. In this scenario, I think I would take this side of the face as the exposure reading rather than here, because this is really the source of the contrast. So this is roughly a 8:1 ratio, which is consistent with our other scene here. And let me just check. So that's there, that's there. And yes, these are roughly, if you wanted to not do this by eye, and you wanted a tool to say that yes, these exposures, these contrasts match with each other, you can use it in that way. You can also use it to adjust your exposure. If one scene, for instance in our other shot here, where the contrast is not as great because of this lens issue, normally I would not attempt to adjust this particular contrast. I think it looks fine in this scenario for it to be not matching, but if you wanted to match the contrast, then you could start doing so, either by pulling down your shadows like this, or you can use your contrast controls, or you can use a power window, or whatever is appropriate for a particular scene. You can use the tool in that way. So if I turn it off, now we have a much higher contrast image. Again, I don't think this looks better, but it does match. Now here's another shot. This is a much more lower contrast shot, so if I just turn off the ratio, just reset that. If I turn off the ratio DCTL, this doesn't have any lighting in it because it was outside, and due to budget constraints we didn't have the lights we need to do a high contrast image outside. So this is just completely flat sky lighting, and the result is something that is a lot flatter than the other images in the shot. So let's have a look at the ratio here. So this is set to +1 and -2. So as you can see, there's nowhere really on the face that gets into our high contrast, at least not here, ratio. You see this bit under the chin. This is probably the only part of the image that's adding any contrast at all to the face. It looks okay because we're getting decent shadows kind of underneath the chin. But if you wanted good shadows on the face, you can see that that is not happening because both sides here have exactly the same exposure readings on the DCTL. And what's worse is you see in the background, a lot of the elements in the background are actually matching the same exposure. So the contrast from the background isn't so great either. If I was shooting the talent against the shed over there, for instance, you'd have the problem with the face being exposed pretty much exactly the same as the shed over here, and it'd be really flat. It's quite fortunate that we have this tree line here to allow for a reasonable contrast between the face and the background. It's not so bad, but it's flat, and the DCTL is telling us that it's quite flat as well. Yeah, not much I can do about it, but I just thought I'd show you as an example of when this tool could be telling you on set that you need to have a different backdrop, or you need to find a way to bring in some negative fills or something if you can. So now let's get into exporting some LUTs so that you can use this how you want to. Let's turn it back on. The way that I work with this is the key isn't going to show up on the LUT, so ignore that. What you want to do is you want to set your target position, and this is going to be different depending on the type of skin that you're shooting. If you're shooting someone with very dark skin, it's obviously going to be a lot lower, the target that you're aiming for, than someone with very pale skin. So a good exposure for my skin, for instance, I'm very pale, is probably over more than one stop above middle grey. You're going to want to export a LUT from this that has a contrast that you're aiming for. So I typically like an 8:1 contrast ratio for moody stuff, and then maybe you're doing interview setups, you might do 4:1 or even 2:1. For the example here, I'm just going to leave this at -2 because that would give us 3 stops of contrast, 8:1 ratio. That's probably my most used one. But what I've done on my monitor is that I've exported one for 16:1, 8:1, and 4:1, and that's what I live with. And I set my target one position, one stop above middle grey. If you shoot a lot of actors with dark skin quite frequently, you might want to have one that's adjusted to have a lower value, because obviously darker skin might be around middle grey, and if you have really dark skin, you're going to be the target's probably good for a stop below middle grey, perhaps. That's not to say that you can't still use your ratio LUTs on people with different skin. It just means that, say if you want to expose the light side of your talent's face at middle grey because their skin is darker, all you do is you just increase the light coming into your camera by a stop while you set the contrast ratios up, and then before you shoot you bring it down a stop. I normally want the target width to be a bit higher when I'm exporting a LUT, and the reason for that is because the LUTs aren't as precise as the DCTL, just because of the nature of how LUTs work. They're not exactly designed for this sort of thing specifically. If your band is really narrow, you might have trouble getting it to show up on your monitor in a clear way, especially because your monitor is probably a lot smaller than the monitor that you're color grading on. So I like to have a one-stop target width, and I boost the surround up a similar amount. It doesn't matter too much, but I like to have it be a bit broader for the LUT. So we've done that. Middle grey's off. Perceived luminance, yes. I like my colours to be overlaid onto a log image, because you'll see a lot more information in the black and white areas of the image in the log version. So what I do now is I select brighter colours, and what that does is it just changes the colours so that they look good on a log image rather than looking flat. Now what I'm going to do is, you need to specify what colour space you are outputting in. So I am in DaVinci Wide Gamut right now, and the camera that I'm shooting with is going to be a Blackmagic. So I'm going to go Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4.5, Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. And now that I've done that, you can see that the colours here make a lot more sense. Obviously, I'm going to want to turn the look off. You don't want any of that. You don't want your exposure adjustments, you don't want any contrast adjustments, like that. Okay, so let's double check. I've got +1, -2, so this is going to be an 8:1 contrast ratio. And I've set it up so that it's overlaid onto my Blackmagic Gen 5 log image. So you go over to your clips that you've got over here, and you right click, and then you generate LUT, and you probably want a 33-point LUT. If you have a slightly fancier monitor, then you can probably use a 65-point LUT, but most cameras, as I found out last time I did a video like this, and a load of you couldn't use the LUTs that I'd exported, most cameras are limited to a 33-point, so that's probably the one you're going to want to export. Okay, so you've exported your LUT and you've uploaded it to your monitor or to your camera. So does it work? Let's try. Here is my footage of me. All I did was I grabbed my camera and I just shot 3 different contrast ratios, and I exposed these entirely using the LUTs that were on my monitor that I just showed you. So if I turn my look on and I change this, let me change the output back to Rec 709 so it looks like an actual image. So I have a key light over to the left of frame here. Then I have a fill light and what I did was I just boosted the fill light to make up the ratios every time. So this actually doesn't have a fill light at all in this shot. This is just the key, and it so happened that the ratio that we got from just the key, if I change this to -3, as you can see here, what we're getting is roughly a 16:1 contrast ratio. And if I turn it off, obviously, this is very high contrast. It's probably too high contrast. It's not a great look. So now, if I move on to the next clip, on this one, I've turned my fill light up a little bit until the LUT was telling me that it's correctly exposed in the shadows. So let's turn on the DCTL. And if I turn my target to position to -2, you can see that just that little bit of extra fill has taken us from a 16:1 to a 8:1 contrast ratio if I turn it off. So this versus this, see? Significant difference. I'd say this looks a lot better. Like I said, I'm an 8:1. I'm an 8:1 guy. So let's move on to the 4:1. Okay, so this is a 4:1 ratio, which is still quite pleasant. It's still got reasonably good contrast, but it's not perhaps as dramatic as 8:1 or 4:1. So if I turn this on and then I boost this up to -1, you can see I've got a 4:1 ratio going on with my face. So like I said, I did not look at the Rec 709 output at all. I just looked at the ratio LUTs that I generated, and I used them to expose, and as you can see, it turned out just fine. So 4:1, 8:1, 16:1. See, it works. So I've left a link in the description where you can download this DCTL. I've also exported a load of LUTs for the various most common camera color spaces, S-Log3, Fuji, whatever, all the ones that are commonly available in your output color space. So a lot of you last time send me some emails saying, oh, this is so good, I really want this. I can't believe you're giving this away for free. I am still giving it away for free, but if you are filled with the overwhelming desire to send me money, then I've also put a PayPal link in the description below where you can do that. You're welcome. If you have suggestions on ways that I can improve this, or features that you want added, or it'd be really useful if it had this, or if it could do this, or if you find a bug and it's not working for you for some reason, you can either email me or drop a message in the comments or whatever, and I would be grateful if you could be my testers for this, because so far I'm the only one who is testing it, so I'm probably going to miss stuff, but yeah, I hope you like it.